Hello everybody, I fancy trying something new out, so let's get Scandinavian. So what have we got here? This is some Kveik. I did look up the pronunciation for this, so I hope I'm kind of along the right lines. But yeah, I read it as Kveik, but apparently Kveik or Kveik is the proper way to say it. So this is some of the Norwegian farmhouse yeast, specifically, because they're not all the same, the Framgarden Stordal Kveik Yeast strain, which I was sent very kindly by Mr. John Anderson. So cheers again, John, for sending me this, and I've had it for a little while now, so he sent it to me in January, and I fancy giving it a go. So I'm basically going to brew up a nice simple kind of blonde ale just to try it out in and see how it goes. So I don't know a huge amount about this stuff, but I've done a little bit of reading up on it. There's loads of really good websites about these kind of Norwegian farmhouse yeast and the beers that are made with them, specifically the Lars something or other website. I'll put a link up on the screen because I've forgotten the name of it, but anyway, there's a website by some guy called Lars who does loads of research into this sort of stuff. Some good reading on there about it. My very general knowledge so far is that basically these are kind of traditional kind of Norwegian farmhouse strains that are passed down sort of, you know, hand to hand almost, or kept stored on yeast rings and so on and so forth, or dried out like the yeast here. And they're basically a kind of whole collection of different strains that have cultured up together and will ferment out under quite a wide range of conditions, so very tolerant of lots of different temperatures, but will still ferment relatively cleanly, I believe, although obviously that depends on the strains and stuff, but can introduce some kind of fruity flavours as well. So yeah, let's have a go with this. I'm going to do a fairly straightforward kind of clean ale with this to see how it goes, and just use this video to kind of record how I get on with this yeast. So I'll be using a fairly simple recipe, pitching it relatively hot to see how it does with that, and just keeping a record of kind of how the fermentation goes and how we get on. So let's go and see the recipe and some footage for the brew day. So let's just have a quick look at this recipe for the ale that I'm going to put the Kveik yeast into. As I said, it's going to keep it fairly simple, so a nice kind of blonde ale, pilsner malt, bit of wheat malt, a little bit of leftover carapils and aromatic, and that's it. And then with the hops, a bit of Styrian Dana, and then some more of that and some Hallertau in at 5 minutes. So the hopping is fairly subdued. There's quite a bit going in at the end there, but it's kind of Hallertau hops and Styrian hops, which are not massive in terms of flavour profile. So it should give a bit of room for the yeast to kind of come through, and if there is any flavour contributions from that, that should be more evident. So 1051 predicted OG should come out, well, depending on how low the yeast ferments down, because it is supposed to be quite a strong attenuator. Should get down to at least 5.4%. 32 IBU, so again, don't want the bitterness to be kind of too prominent in the beer and overpowering it. A few of the bits in there were basically me trying to use up some leftovers, but it makes for a fairly standard kind of blonde sort of ale recipe anyway. So yeah, so let's get on with brewing. We're just about to get the strike water up for mashing in, and getting on with the rest of the brew day. Okay, so it's pretty much done. I have chilled that down to about 30 degrees and it's now sitting at probably just under that, so about 28, 29 degrees in the FV, or the little plastic storage box that I use as an FV. I'm just going to pitch it at this temperature, so that's up into the sort of top, the higher range of the, well actually I think it can go a bit hotter than that even, it can go up into the mid 30s I believe, so yeah, it's a lot warmer than I would normally pitch any other yeast, but obviously that's what this is supposed to be good at, so I'll try it in the higher range. This is supposed to be enough for a couple of full-size batches, so I guess I'll chuck in about a third of this packet, and I'm not going to put it in the brew fridge. I've got a lager in the brew fridge in the shed anyway, so this one is just going to, I'm basically just going to wrap it up in a towel and stick it next to a radiator upstairs and see how it gets on. So yeah, kind of testing out the sort of heat tolerance of this stuff to see how it gets on. So let's chuck some yeast in there and see what happens. From what I've heard, this stuff goes off like a rocket as well, so it will probably, or hopefully, will be fermenting within a few hours. So yeah, I reckon that's probably, let's chuck a little bit more in just in case. That should be enough, and I will update on this once it's fermenting and see how it gets on, or how quickly it starts to kick off. So this is about 7 hours after I pitched that yeast, and as you can see it is absolutely going nuts. There's a good bit of krausen forming on the top, and yeah, looks like it's well into its fermentation already, so especially for a dry yeast that's pretty serious. It must have got going within just a few hours for it to be at this stage already. So yeah, pretty impressed with the lack of lag time there for this. It's definitely a fast starter, as I was expecting. So I'll wrap that up and leave it to get on with its business. So we're about 36 hours into fermentation on this. You can see there's a real thick layer of yeast on the top, but the krausen's kind of eased off a little bit. The temperature's dropped down slightly, so it was generating quite a bit of heat before. You can see there's quite a bit of yeast floating around, but I think it's starting to slow down a little bit, which is pretty quick. But obviously you can see there's quite a bit of fermentation still happening there. It just seems to have, the activity seems to have slowed down slightly, so there's not quite as bigger chunks floating around in there. So yeah, it's getting on with it pretty fast. Plenty of yeast in there in the top, so if I did want to scoop some yeast out and dry it out, that would probably be quite easy to do at this point. I'm not going to do that on this batch. I'm going to leave that until I do a bigger batch with this yeast, if I do a bigger batch. So yeah, that's where we're at the moment. Right, so we're about 3 days in now, and as you can see, most of that yeast has kind of dropped out now. So it's flocculating pretty well for this early on. You can see it's starting to clear up a little bit, so there's a little bit of yeast still floating on the top from the krausen, but that's starting to drop through. But I think that that's looking pretty much done. The temperature's dropped right down, so it's just sort of at room temperature now. So yeah, it looks like most of the active fermentation is finished, so we'll leave that just to clear down and for the rest of the yeast to drop out, and then yeah, give it the usual couple of weeks, and then we'll be bottling this one up. But all very quick and rapid so far, so yeah, pretty impressive. Okay, so this Kveik brew has been in the fermenter for about 10 days, and it was looking pretty finished in the FV. So I've taken a sample off, and I'm not sure if you can see the numbers on there. It's pretty much bang on 10-10. As you can see, nice and clear. It was a very light grain bill, so I was expecting it to be fairly light anyway. And yeah, it's looking pretty good in terms of being finished. I thought it might attenuate down a little bit lower than that, so I might leave it for a little bit longer just to check the gravity on another day, but it doesn't look like it's doing much in there, so I think it's done. So let's have a little taste of it and see how it's going so far. So it's got quite a I mean, it's got Hallertau hops in it, but it has got quite a lagery kind of aroma to it. There's maybe a little bit of fruitiness in the background. I wouldn't say it smells particularly funky or anything. Quite a clean kind of beery smell. So flavour wise, at the moment, obviously very early on, and it's quite warm straight out the FV, but looking pretty good, very kind of crisp. There's there is some fruitiness there, a slightly tart kind of fruitiness. I think the the description for this strain does mention kind of red apples and stuff. I'm not sure if I'd say I can see that. It's maybe not that distinct at the moment. But yeah, it's got that sort of slightly lagery kind of bite to it as well. There's maybe a hint of sort of slightly sulphury smell on the nose. I think that would just be a really nice light blonde ale when it's bottled and carbonated up. So yeah, I will probably be doing that shortly, and then we'll get back to you once it's had a little bit of time in the bottle and we can do a proper taste test. Right, so here it is, the finished article. We've had this one in the bottle for about 3 weeks now, and it's time to give it a taste test, see what we think. So it's not massively carbonated, judging by the way that popped off the bottle there. Apologies for the dirty glass, I'm just too lazy to go inside and clean that. And there we have it. So, first impressions. It did flock out pretty hard initially, but there is quite a haze on that. It's not that I'm particularly fussed about it being slightly hazy, but I did, well, based on how it was dropping out initially, I did think it would maybe clear down a bit quicker than that. It could be to do with the way I've brewed this or something. I didn't put wheat or anything else in there that would be likely to induce quite a haze, but that's yeah, I mean, it's not particularly clear at all at the moment. Might just need a little bit more time in the cold to clear down, but there is a little bit of a hint of that kind of saison spicy aroma to it. Not much, but just a little bit there. It's not quite as clean smelling as I thought it was before. And then there's some kind of fruity, yeah, just a very subtle, almost very subtle kind of Belgian yeast or saison kind of yeast in there. Let's give it a taste. Again, compared to when I tried it just in the sample jar, when I was just about to bottle it, there seems to be a lot more character kind of coming out in that now. Let's just put it in context. For something that I've fermented at 30 degrees, I would have expected it to be like, you know, crazy esters, quite hot in terms of like the alcohol, you know, if it had phenolic notes or whatever, that would be blowing your head off. But it's clean considering. But there's definitely some character there. It's not a totally clean flavour. Considering the hops I used in there were kind of Hersbrucker and a bit of what was it, Bobek, I think it was. No, well, Hallertau and Styrian Dana, not Bobek, but a similar hop. Neither of which are particularly, you know, powerful in terms of the flavour. Yeah, it was a fairly big late edition of the Hersbrucker, but and you get that sort of slightly spicy, lagery kind of hop flavour in there. A little bit of cider sort of note to it, but not you know, not in an unpleasant way. It's definitely not coming across like an off flavour sort of you know, green apple kind of acetaldehyde type taste. It's more just like a little hint of scrumpy sort of cider flavour in there. But again, not much. It's not like it's an overpowering flavour. In some ways, flavour-wise, it does actually remind me a bit of you know, quite a fruity sort of English ale yeast. I think if you maybe took the temperature down a little bit, it might actually work quite well with you know, a bitter or an ESB or something like that. It's nice. I'm really enjoying that. It's come out slightly different to how I was expecting based on the earlier samples, as I said. So quite yeah, quite a bit of character coming through from the yeast. As I said, relatively, for the temperature it was fermented at, it's still quite clean. So it's still coming across as a, you know, sort of fairly, not neutral, but a fairly clear, fairly clean yeast. You know, esters and spiciness are not dominating it. Aroma wise, it does have a slight funkiness to it, but that doesn't really come across in the flavour to me. But it's nice, I like that, and I will definitely use that yeast again. So once again, thank you to Mr. John Anderson for sending me this yeast. One thing that I'm definitely going to make use of with this, because of the temperature tolerance that it has, is over the summer when, you know, the shed and the house are getting a little bit crazy in terms of temperatures, I will be able to ferment beer with this yeast in the shed and not worry about the temperature going, you know, up into the 30s or whatever. If I've got the fermentation fridge, I'll probably, you know, be using that to store beer and keep that cool. So it's a really useful, you know, tool in terms of something that you can brew with. So yeah, Kveik Yeast, the Framgarden Stordal strain, very nice, and I will be using it again, and probably, if I can get hold of them, experimenting with some different varieties, because it's tasty and it's made a good beer there, and it's also a bit of a super yeast. So cheers to Kveik Yeast, and I'll see you all soon.
I'm the dude. So that's what you call me, you know? That or his dudeness or duder or, you know, El Duderino.